The war had stripped away almost every trace of certainty. In the chaos of surrender, a group of young Japanese women, some barely more than teenagers, were marched under the watchful eyes of American soldiers toward a hastily built prisoner camp. Fear weighed heavy in the air, thicker than the dust that clung to their clothes and hair. For years they had been taught to believe that the enemy was ruthless, that capture meant dishonor, suffering, and humiliation worse than death. Many of them whispered silent prayers as they shuffled forward, afraid to look directly at the men in uniform who carried weapons and spoke in harsh foreign voices. The women braced themselves for cruelty, expecting at any moment to be struck or shouted at. Inside the camp, the atmosphere was suffocating. Barbed wire coiled around the perimeter like an iron snake, and watchtowers loomed above them. The women huddled together, clutching at each other's sleeves, desperate to hold on to any shred of comfort. The sound of boots hitting the gravel seemed to echo louder than thunder. One of the women, Yumi, only 19 years old, kept replaying her father's last words in her mind. "Do not trust the Americans, they will treat you as less than human." But as she glanced around at the other prisoners, faces pale with fear, lips trembling, she realized they all shared the same haunting thought. How much suffering awaited them here? The first orders came swiftly. "Line up," barked one of the guards. None of the women understood the English words, but the tone was clear. They stumbled into formation, eyes fixed on the ground. Their stomachs churned with dread, convinced this was only the beginning of torment. But then something strange happened. Instead of yelling further or raising his weapon, the soldier pointed toward a row of tents and gestured for them to move inside. When one of the women tripped on a stone and fell, another soldier stepped forward, not to punish her, but to help her up. His hand was firm yet gentle, and he even muttered something softly as if trying to reassure her. The women exchanged puzzled looks. Was this a trick? Or had they misunderstood what was happening? Inside the tents they found not chains or cages, but rows of cots and blankets. Metal cups filled with water waited on a wooden table. The sight was so unexpected that a few of them froze, unable to believe it was real. Yumi's lips parted slightly in disbelief. Could it be possible that these soldiers, enemies they had feared for so long, were treating them with something that resembled respect? Their fear did not vanish, but a small spark of confusion grew inside each of them. Something about this captivity was different from what they had been warned to expect. The night was restless. Whispers spread across the rows of cots like wildfire. Why did they give us water? Why didn't they strike us? What if this is only temporary before the real cruelty begins? No one had an answer, but for the first time since their capture, the women felt a flicker of doubt, not about themselves but about the enemy. And that doubt would change everything. They came expecting brutality, but the first signs hinted at something else entirely, a mystery that would challenge everything they had been taught. What would you do if the very enemy you feared showed you unexpected kindness? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The morning sun crept through the thin fabric of the tents, waking the women to a silence that felt heavy with unanswered questions. Yumi opened her eyes cautiously, half expecting to find soldiers standing over them with weapons drawn. Instead, she saw only the slow rise and fall of her companion's breathing, the rustle of canvas in the wind, and the faint aroma of something cooking outside. When they were escorted out, the camp looked different in daylight. The barbed wire still loomed, a painful reminder of their captivity, but there was also order and a strange sense of calm. American soldiers stood near the entrance, not yelling, not forcing, but simply guiding them toward a long wooden table. On it were bowls of porridge and bread, simple but more food than many of the women had seen in weeks. The prisioneras hesitated. Their hands trembled as they exchanged nervous glances. Yumi's stomach growled loudly, betraying her hunger, but still she could not move. Were they being tricked? Was this kindness a mask for something darker? Then one soldier, a tall young man with sandy hair and tired eyes, motioned for them to sit. He mimed eating with a spoon, offering an awkward but genuine smile. His uniform bore the weight of authority, but his gesture felt strangely human. Slowly, one woman stepped forward, then another. Soon, all were seated, dipping spoons into the warm food. their eyes darting back and forth in disbelief. As they ate, Yumi caught sight of the same soldier offering an extra piece of bread to an older prisoner who struggled to hold her spoon. The woman bowed her head slightly, a gesture of gratitude she had not expected to give to an enemy. The soldier only nodded, his expression unreadable. Whispers erupted among the women later that day. Why are they treating us this way? Do they see us as human beings? Or is this only to keep us calm before something worse? That night, as they lay on their cots, Yumi couldn't shake the memory of the soldier's smile. It wasn't warm enough to be called friendly, but it wasn't cold enough to be cruel. It unsettled her. If the enemy could show respect, then everything she had been taught might not be the full truth. Days passed, and more small moments chipped away at their fear. When one woman twisted her ankle carrying water, a soldier walked beside her, taking the weight of the bucket without saying a word. Another offered a blanket to a prisoner shivering in the night air. None of these gestures erased the fact that they were captives, but each one planted a seed of doubt about the nature of their captors. Yumi began to watch the soldiers more carefully. She noticed how some of them lingered near the edges of the camp, staring off into the distance with haunted expressions. They were young, many not much older than she was. She wondered what they thought when they looked at the women. Did they see enemies? Or did they see frightened human beings just like themselves? Still, mistrust clung stubbornly. One evening, whispers rose again among the prisoners. What if they are only pretending? What if kindness is a strategy to make us let our guard down? Yumi didn't know what to believe, but deep inside something had shifted. For the first time since her capture, she felt the faint stirrings of curiosity. Curiosity about who these soldiers really were, and why they treated them with such restraint. The question lingered in her heart, unresolved, but impossible to ignore. The walls between enemy and human were beginning to crack, but what lay beyond them could change everything. As days turned into weeks, the atmosphere inside the camp slowly shifted. The women still lived under the shadow of barbed wire, watched by rifles from the towers, yet the tone of captivity was not what they had imagined. Fear had not vanished, but it was no longer the only emotion that filled their days. The soldiers' small gestures of respect began to leave deeper marks. A young woman named Aiko, frail and recovering from fever, received medicine from a soldier who kneeled beside her cot. He didn't speak her language, but his careful movements, checking her pulse, making sure she swallowed the pills, were unmistakably compassionate. Aiko later whispered, almost in disbelief, "Why would he care if I lived or died?" At night, under the dim glow of lanterns, the prisoners whispered stories about what they had seen. For every tale of brutality they had once feared, they now had an example of unexpected kindness. A soldier shielding them from the rain, another quietly repairing a torn sandal, another leaving behind an apple on the table as if by accident. Yet these moments of humanity clashed violently with the images the women had carried their whole lives. Yumi, restless and torn, felt her thoughts growing louder each day. She couldn't forget her father's warning, couldn't erase the propaganda posters that had painted Americans as monsters. Still, when she remembered the soldier helping the older woman with bread, or the blanket draped over a shivering prisoner, the certainty she once had began to crumble. One late afternoon, while fetching water from a barrel, Yumi accidentally locked eyes with the tall soldier with sandy hair. He froze for a moment, surprised that she looked at him directly. Instead of barking an order, he gave a small nod, almost like a silent acknowledgement. Yumi's heart pounded. She quickly turned away, but something inside her had shifted. For the first time, she wondered if she could see not just an enemy in uniform, but a man with thoughts, fears, and memories of his own. That night, she overheard two soldiers talking near the tents. Their English was broken in her ears, but she recognized words: home, mother, fear. She couldn't understand the full sentences, yet the tone was heavy with longing. In that moment, Yumi realized they were not only soldiers, they were sons, brothers, and perhaps husbands, just like the men from her own village. The idea disturbed her more than it comforted her. How could the enemy be so much like the people she loved? How could respect exist in a place meant to strip away dignity? Still, not everyone in the camp accepted this shift. Some prisoners warned against believing it. "Do not be fooled," whispered Keiko, the eldest among them. "They may act kindly today, but tomorrow they could show their true faces." The tension grew, not only between captors and captives, but also among the women themselves. Some clung to fear for safety. Others began to feel a fragile hope that humanity could exist even in war. Yumi lay awake that night, staring at the canvas above her cot. She could not silence the question rising louder each day. What if everything I believed about the enemy was wrong? A fragile thread of understanding was forming, but it carried both promise and danger. Because once you start seeing the enemy as human, the world is never the same again. The rains came suddenly, turning the camp into a swamp of mud and dripping tents. For the prisoners, it meant cold nights and damp clothes that clung to their skin. Misery pressed down on them once more. Yet, even in that discomfort, the unexpected continued. One night, as the rain hammered against the canvas, a soldier passed by, leaving a bundle of extra blankets near the entrance of the women's tent. He didn't speak. He didn't wait for gratitude. He simply placed them there and disappeared into the storm. The prisoners looked at each other in silence, unsure whether to take the blankets or question the motive. Eventually, Aiko pulled one across her shoulders and tears rolled down her cheeks. Not from fear this time, but from the relief of warmth. Moments like these began to chip away at the walls the women had built around their hearts. And with those cracks came revelations. One afternoon, Yumi noticed the tall, sandy-haired soldier sitting alone by the fence, staring at a small photograph in his hand. She couldn't see the picture clearly, but the way his lips pressed into a thin line and his eyes softened told her it was someone he missed. Perhaps a mother, a sister, or a lover waiting far away. For a heartbeat, Yumi saw not the enemy, but a mirror of her own longing for family. The divide between us and them blurred further when the women began to overhear more English words. They caught fragments: scared, hungry, hope. Even without full translation, the emotions were clear. The soldiers were not immune to fear. They too were young men thrown into a war they did not choose. But not all revelations brought comfort. One evening, Keiko confronted Yumi. "They are still our captors," she warned. "Do not confuse small kindness with trust. Remember why we are here. Remember who we have lost." Yumi wanted to agree. She wanted to hold on to the anger that had shielded her heart. But when she recalled the soldier's quiet nod, the blanket in the storm, the bowl of food placed gently before her, she could not silence the truth. There was more to these men than the image of monsters she had carried. The tension reached its peak when one prisoner collapsed from exhaustion while carrying firewood. Without hesitation, two soldiers rushed to her side, one lifting her into his arms, the other clearing the path. The women gasped, expecting rough handling, but instead they saw care, urgency, even concern in the soldiers' faces. That image spread through the camp like wildfire. "Why would they help her?" someone whispered. "Why not just let her fall?" The questions became louder than the answers anyone could give. That night, as the storm subsided, Yumi sat awake, listening to the soft breathing of the women around her. The truth had become undeniable. The enemy she had been told to fear might be capable of something she never imagined: empathy. And with that realization came a dangerous thought, one that both frightened and comforted her. If respect can exist even here, then perhaps the world is not as divided as we were taught to believe. The prisoners' view of their captors had changed forever, but the war outside the camp still raged, and soon, the fragile balance inside would be tested. Weeks passed, and the war outside the barbed wire drew closer to its end. Rumors filtered into the camp, whispers of surrender, of peace negotiations, of battles fading into silence. The women felt it in the air, though no soldier spoke of it directly. Something was changing. One morning, the prisoners were assembled outside. Instead of harsh orders, the soldiers stood quietly, their expressions unreadable. Then, through gestures and broken words, it became clear. The war was over. The women would be released. Shock rippled through the group. Freedom, something they had barely dared to dream about, was now at their fingertips. Yet strangely, joy did not come as easily as expected. Instead, the women felt a heavy mixture of relief, confusion, and an unspoken sorrow that they had not anticipated. As preparations for departure began, Yumi found herself searching for the tall soldier with sandy hair. She spotted him near the gate, his rifle slung loosely over his shoulder, his eyes distant. Gathering her courage, she stepped forward. She had no words in English, and he had none in Japanese, but still, she bowed deeply, an act of gratitude that transcended language. The soldier hesitated, then gave a slow nod. His lips parted as if he wanted to speak, but no sound came. Instead, he raised his hand in a small, respectful salute. In that silent exchange, something powerful passed between them, an acknowledgement that they had seen each other not as enemies, but as human beings. When the gates finally opened, the women walked out into a world that had changed forever. They were free, but they carried with them memories that would never fade. For Yumi, the lesson was carved into her heart. Hatred can be taught, but respect can be discovered, even in the unlikeliest of places. Years later, as she told her story to younger generations, Yumi's voice trembled not with anger but with awe. The war took so much from us, she would say, but it also revealed something no one expected, that even in the darkest times, respect can survive. And if respect can survive, then so can hope. The women had left the camp believing they would only remember the fear and the shame of captivity. Instead, many carried with them a deeper truth, that dignity can be preserved by kindness even between enemies. And so the story endures, not as a tale of defeat, but as a reminder. Humanity is never fully lost, even when surrounded by the walls of war. Respect is stronger than hate. And even in the midst of war, compassion has the power to rewrite the story we tell about our enemies and about ourselves. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more emotional adoption and humanity stories. And tell me in the comments, what does respect mean to you?